Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lemon Dew. I'm Brie, and today's episode is going to be about my experiences of being an autistic student in college and university. So before I begin, I'm just going to give a quick disclaimer as per usual. Now, there won't necessarily be any triggers in this particular episode. However, as per mentioned in previous episodes, if I do refer to people or locations, I will not be disclosing real names, mainly because this is a way to protect my identity. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, from my experience as a college student, I would say that I had more of an opportunity for a fresh start. In comparison to secondary school, I would say that college wasn't really the best part of my years of education, but it wasn't exactly the worst either. The main thing that made me feel a bit better about being a college student was the fact that I didn't have to see everyone from my secondary school because I didn't really go to the same college as a lot of girls that I used to go to school with. I mean, there were some that did go to my college, but I never really saw them around often because I was often in a different class as I studied a BTEC level 3 in art and design. Now, two close friends that I knew from primary and secondary school did attend the same college as me, but I never really saw them that often purely because, again, we had different classes. For the most part, when it came to making friends in college, it was still quite difficult because of my social awkwardness. From what I remember, I was still a very quiet person when I was in college, and I didn't really talk to a lot of people. But at the same time, I did have a few good experiences where I started to hang around with this group of girls. And there was one girl that I remember befriending in my first year who had similar interests to me in art as well as anime, but unfortunately, I lost touch with her because she dropped out in the middle of the first year due to some personal problems. And because she dropped out, I found it difficult to get back in touch because she didn't really have as much social media except a Facebook account, from what I remember. And all I have to say is, wherever she is today, I do hope that she is doing well in life. There was also another girl that I befriended in my second year of college who, like myself, was a quiet student and also a hardworking student. But after, I think it was September 2020, during the pandemic, I also lost contact. And again, it's kind of a shame because, sometimes when it comes to friendships, you kind of assume that you would still be in contact with certain people, but then certain things do change, people move away. So that was kind of what happened in that case. For the most part, I did have people in my class sort of ask me why I was a quiet student and things like that, but it wasn't really in like a malicious way. And from what I remember as well, I never really mentioned much about being autistic because at the time I wasn't really sure how people would react. Because in secondary school, I often had very poor experiences where I mentioned my autism, and then people would sort of say that I was disabled and stuff like that. And it was very difficult for me to open up, hence why I would spend most of my years just keeping myself guarded. And it was kind of the same thing in college because I suppose due to those previous experiences, I'd often learned to mask my social awkwardness and to not trust people. But then at the same time, there were a couple of instances where I did sort of try a little bit to open up to people, but at times it was still quite difficult. Another thing about my experience of being a college student was that I never really did much extracurriculars. So, in primary and I guess to an extent secondary school, I used to do a few extracurriculars, and then college, I never really did any. I just kind of showed up to my classes and then went home and did my coursework. So, that was basically the foundation of my college years. And also, when it came to doing my work, I was one of those people that preferred working by myself because I wasn't really great at communicating with people, and the social awkwardness didn't really help, especially when it came to doing presentations. So, like, sometimes in my college classes, I would have to do presentations in front of my class relating to my artwork, and it was very difficult because I'm not really used to speaking in front of people, and I don't even like the sound of my voice. And when I used to do presentations, sometimes I would sort of try to avoid the eye contact because I would get really nervous. And the thing with me as well is when it comes to eye contact, I don't really like people looking at me directly in the eyes because I just get so nervous. It just gets to a point where I just try to avoid as much eye contact as possible by looking elsewhere. And it's kind of the same thing when it comes to like personal space as well. I don't really like people being near me, so I have to kind of distance myself in order to protect my personal space. And that was something I really struggled with in college. But even though there were instances where I used to be really nervous when doing presentations and things like that, I would try the best I could. And a lot of people would say that I did well and that I spoke well, but I suppose because I had years of low self esteem, it was very difficult to sort of come into my own as a college student. And I suppose maybe that was why I didn't really bother doing a lot of extracurriculars. I just kind of wanted to finish my course, go home, and stuff like that. Because I guess, in a sense, I kind of lost interest in a lot of extracurriculars. So there were a few that I did back in primary school, like gymnastics and choir. Then I quit those because I lost interest. Then I did a poetry class in secondary school, and then I had to quit because my GCSEs got in the way. And I kind of felt as well if I did extracurriculars in college, I probably would have ended up quitting either because of loss of interest or because I had quite a lot of coursework. Another thing that I kind of wanted to mention as well is that when it came to college, I suppose there were certain experiences that I really liked. So, one of the main things that was very different to secondary school was the fact that you had more of a sense of freedom. So, you could listen to music in your classes or podcasts and things like that. You could walk to the toilet and walk out the campus whenever you wanted. And that was something I liked because when I was in secondary school, you never really had that sense of freedom. You know, your teachers, at least from personal experience, would talk down to you as if you were a child that did not have a brain. And, you know, in secondary school, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of my teachers had this habit of talking down to me and underestimating me because I was autistic. Whereas in college, I never really had that experience because my teachers knew that I had the potential to do well. And another thing I kind of noticed as well was that before I entered college, when I got my GCSE results, I had to bring them with me to the college that I wanted to go to as my first choice. And when I did that, I remember being told by one of the teachers there that my GCSE grades were too low for A levels because I got a mix of B, C, and D grades from what I remember. So when it came to college, if I did A levels, I probably would have been at risk of failing, hence why I ended up doing a BTEC in art and design instead. And looking back at my experience, I think doing a BTEC was a better option for me because I was always a lot better at coursework than exams. And this was because when it came to coursework, okay, so let me just start again. So, when it came to my education, from what I remember, I was actually better at coursework than exams. And I think it was because with coursework, it was more practical and I was a student that liked to sort of do things with their hands, especially when it came to art, which was one of my favorite subjects. And when it came to exams, my issue was with multiple choice questions because they threw me off a lot. And being more of a visual learner and someone who preferred doing practical things didn't really help when it came to doing exams. Although, from my experience of being a college student, I actually did really well when it came to my assignments. So, in my coursework in my first year, I got mostly merit and distinction grades. And then in my second year, I got all distinctions in all of my assignments, which was a huge improvement. And I think what kind of helped was the fact that all the work I was doing was practical. So I would have to do assignments where I would mostly design products and such. And I would have to come up with ideas that would lead to experiments and final pieces. I did have a theoretical side to my course because I used to do essays. And to be honest, I never really liked doing essays in college because I just didn't really see the point in doing them. And coming up with the right words in an essay was something I struggled with. But then again, I still got pretty high grades when I used to do essays because I put in the effort into researching them and things like that. And I think what kind of helped was the fact that I was doing an art course. And because I was doing a course that I was genuinely interested in, I actually put in more effort. And I think that was why I actually preferred doing the BTECs. Another thing that I did want to mention was that when I was in my second year as a college student, I made a comic about my experience of being an autistic person. So I think from what I remember, this was more to do with my experience in secondary school, and I actually made the comic on my phone. So I had a Galaxy Note 4 where I basically drew out all my panels and then I scanned them and colored them in the Note 4, and my comic was displayed in my college's graduation exhibition. So before I graduated, I actually got the chance to put my artwork up, and a lot of people liked it, which was a good thing. And I ended up doing an updated version of my comic as well, but that was in university, which I'm going to get to after finishing this episode. But I really enjoyed making it, and at some point, I do want to actually find a way to publish an updated version on Amazon or something so that people could like buy it and stuff. But yeah, that was pretty much the majority of my experience as a college student. who was autistic. So there's going to be a small break, and then after the break, I am going to be talking about my university experience. So I will see you shortly. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. So, in this next part, I'm going to be talking briefly about my experience of being an autistic student in university. So, without further ado, let's begin. From what I remember about university, this was actually the best stage of my education. The only negatives were more so to do with the actual course because I felt that it didn't really prepare me for the illustration industry. And I felt that when it came to the work experience side of things, it was kind of difficult to talk to tutors about it because certain tutors were specialized in areas that were completely irrelevant to illustration. But other than that, I would say the reason why I enjoyed university a lot was not only because, like college, there was more of a sense of freedom and you were treated more so like an adult rather than a child, but I found that university was probably the place where I actually had a lot of friends, or I just talked to people that I could gel with in general. When it came to like my friendship groups and things like that, I would say that I had a mix of neurotypical and neurodivergent friends because there were a couple of people that I knew that were on the autism spectrum that were quote unquote level one, or as most people would refer it to, high functioning, like myself. But I think for the most part, I got on well with like a lot of people. And one of the things that really helped in terms of self confidence was the fact that if I mentioned I was autistic, people wouldn't really be so judgmental. And I felt that I was in a stage where I was actually beginning to feel okay with talking about autism and things like that, especially because, my third year, I actually dedicated an entire project. So I did a self initiated project in my third year, which was my final year of university when I was studying my illustration course. And this project was basically about autism. So I did two pieces, one of which was a mock design of a sensory toy for nursery school children slash primary school children. And then I did another comic called Autism in Me, which you can find on my Instagram. So basically, this comic was about my experience of growing up with autism from like when I was born to the present. And I actually had the opportunity to display this in my university's work in progress show. And aside from displaying my comic, I actually managed to sell a few copies. So I remember selling a few copies to parents in my mum's old workplace. So I sold a few to parents who had autistic children. And when it came to the comic in itself, the way I made it was like I wanted to just have visuals tell the story. So I didn't want to have words. I wanted to have pure visuals, and then you would use the visuals to follow the story. So whilst there were no words in it, you could still tell what it was about and you could still feel emotions, if that makes sense. Because sometimes, at least from my personal perspective of being an artist, when it comes to art, people can interpret things very differently. And, you have many experiences as well where different people can see different things because art, as most people would think, is subjective, you know? But yeah, anyway, when it came to my experience at university, aside from being more confident in terms of talking about autism and going as far as doing a project, I found that I actually participated in more extracurricular stuff. So I think from what I remember, I tried out a couple of like sessions where I could experiment with some of the equipment used in my university. And I also did work at my university, although I'm going to talk more about this when I get to my next episode, which is autism and work. So that's going to be split into two parts, but I will provide more details at the end. But anyway, when I was in my second year as a university student, I actually started working. So I was basically temping at my university. And I remember at the time I was mostly going to like different campuses to do work as a student panelist and things like that. So I would be involved in recruitment processes for tutors that were based in my university. And I was also participating in like feedback groups and things like that. So whilst I was in between classes in my second and third year, I was working at the same time. And I also did professional mentoring when I was in my final year. So I kind of wanted to do that because I basically wanted to look at ways I could go about self employment as an artist, because that's one of my main aspirations in life, is to run my own art business where I have a studio and I can, sell my art. And, I did that as well. And then for work experience, I think this was in my second year or going towards the end of my second year, I was actually working with some other students to facilitate a 2-day art program. And I got my pieces from my second year entitled The Wonders of Marbling exhibited, and I designed a projection for the DJ booth and some lockers. And, doing that project gave me more confidence to even put my own ideas out, because normally I'm just like really quiet and I wouldn't really go as far as doing that. But for the most part, besides the actual course content, I actually had a good experience when I was at university. And another thing as well that I noticed was that I actually had more support, especially in comparison to secondary school, because I remember before starting my course, I had to do an assessment in terms of what kind of support I needed. So I remember getting help with costs for my laptop, which I still have today, as well as getting some specialized programs installed. So I had like an audio note taker program installed, which was supposed to help with lectures, because sometimes with lectures, the tutors would go so fast, and that tool is one that I'm really grateful for, because I could use it to record lectures and highlight the different types of things the tutor was saying, and then use that as notes for my work, which made a huge difference, especially when it came to doing essays and things like that. And I also had like a read and write tool, which had like a dictionary built in as well, which really helped with my essays. And I also did get extra time, which was something I was grateful for. So sometimes, as I was struggling with mental health, more so depression and doubts about dropping out of university, I did have extra time when it came to my assignments, because when I was a university student, I would often be juggling lots of assignments at once. So I remember, I think in my second year, I was doing like 5 projects on the go as I was doing temp work as well. And sometimes for me, the way I work is I have to do things one at a time. So if I'm multitasking too often and I get to a point where I zone out or I get confused, I can get stressed. And looking back at my experience with the education system, that was one thing I struggled with in secondary school, was just, you know, all this GCSE coursework, all these exams, all this prep, and there was just so much of it. But again, the issue was the one size fits all approach, which is adapted in a lot of institutes. So, as I mentioned in my secondary school episodes, I genuinely feel that if you are in a position where you have a disability, you often get pushed aside and you're left to fail because there's no support. And knowing that my university had support, like the extra time for my essays and things like that, was a big help because it made it easier to juggle things, and that extra 2 week period gave me more time to go through my work as well. And another thing was that my university did have great mental health services. So I remember in my first year when I was struggling with depression, I used to see a therapist like every week. So I would go and have my hour session, and I was able to talk about whatever I wanted because it was my space where I could talk about what I needed to. And then I also used to see therapists sometimes in between my second year and third year because I had some doubts about finishing my course. And it was actually helpful knowing that that level of support was there because, like, when I was in, secondary school and things like that, I never really felt that I got as much support from teachers and stuff, especially because a lot of them would invalidate my mental health and say that I was faking being depressed and I was faking fainting and I was faking panic attacks. And, when people say stuff like that, I just think that it's really sad because the thing is that a lot of people, especially today, find it really difficult to talk about disabilities and to talk about mental health because you either have people that invalidate it or you have people that will self diagnose themselves in order to make themselves seem quirky. But then you have lots of closed minded people that do not understand what it's like to go through certain things. Because, as I've mentioned many times now, I do have clinical depression as well. And it's not really fun to be depressed. It's not really fun because, you have days where you just don't want to face the world. You just don't want to get up and do anything. You don't want to be around people because they just say things that might not seem like they're aggravating, but you just feel aggravated if somebody's in your space or somebody's interrupting you with their presence and things like that. So, compared to secondary school, especially, university, in terms of the mental health support, was really great for me because at least I was able to, like, I guess, open up on things, and it was just easier. Although sometimes I still kind of keep my guard up because sometimes I still have those instances where it's like I can't really trust people, you know? And I think on top of the mental health support, having genuine friends helped because, when I used to go through like secondary school, especially, I would really struggle with making friends. And I guess it's because for me, I had like issues where I'd be making friends with the wrong people. And I guess because I consider myself to be a person who does have a sensitive heart, people can take advantage of that. And I don't like that, and I don't like it when other people, especially like autistic people, have that experience because it's just really sad, It just makes me want to cry when I see vulnerable people being taken advantage of. But yeah. But other than that, I would say university for the most part did have quite a lot of good experiences. It was just that I regretted doing my course. So anyway, I guess that's pretty much it for this particular episode. So, in the next 2 weeks, and to be specific, this will be on the 28th of April, I'm going to be releasing part one of autism and work, where I talk about my experiences of being an autistic person who is currently employed and has been through quite a few jobs. In the second part of this particular episode, I'm also going to be doing a bit more in terms of talking about the issues that autistic people have in relation to the workplace. This mostly applies to the home country I'm based in, which is the UK, although, of course, certain people in other countries might have similar experiences, although it depends on the person because no autistic person is the same and everyone does have different experiences and everyone has different needs. So, anyway, I do hope that you enjoyed listening to today's episode, and as always, it would be much appreciated if you could provide comments and feedback. I do try my best to sound as articulate as possible, but I'm still kind of nervous when I'm talking. And as per mentioned, there's no script or anything. I just talk directly from the heart and release my emotions as I feel them because I think that makes my podcast more authentic. So until the 28th of April, I hope you guys have a great day. And also, I just want to say goodbye for now. So, bye.